The portals of change are opening once again. New forms are about to rush into our reality, and the old will be purged. Yes, in September 2025, eclipse season is here once again, and so it's time to ask, what's in the box? What does the cosmos have in store for us this time? Well, this month, eclipses are taking place in the opposing signs of Virgo and Pisces, the axis of existence. A solar eclipse in the last degree of Virgo, one of the crisis points of the zodiac, is signaling great pressure on technical or technological systems, or on the global economy itself. And Pluto, the planet of deep transformation, is heading out of bounds into a state where it's not beholden to the normal rules. It hasn't done what it's doing this month since the period of the French and American revolutions. Things are going to get weird. And in this forecast episode, we're going to explore what that weird is going to look like, both for individuals and for the wider world. I'm your host, Dan Waits. This is World Astrology Report, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. If you're enjoying this video, please do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and even activate notifications to make sure you don't miss future episodes. We're living at a remarkable time in history. A multipolar world is emerging. We're coming to terms with the reality of the UFO phenomenon and our place in the cosmic order. We're rediscovering our forgotten ancient history and becoming wiser to the methods that the archonic forces of the world used to govern us. At such a period of time, most months of the year give an astrologer good reason to think that extraordinary things are going to happen. And this month is no exception. But first of all, we're going to review what happened over the previous month. Now, last month saw a remarkable astrological configuration known as a kite forming in the sky. I thought this astrology looked dangerous and would signify confrontation and revelation, and would have to do with nuclear technology. And we also had remote viewing data from Josh Maitland on this astrology, which we looked at in this video. Josh saw dramatic events related to the ocean, submarines, and the broad theme of UFOs and nukes. And I think we saw all of these things, but with a caveat, because this configuration actually made its presence felt a lot earlier than I expected in late July. Firstly, on July the 30th, we saw the massive 8.8 Richter earthquake on the Kamchatka Peninsula in eastern Russia, which caused a tsunami in parts of Russia. The earthquake took place very close to the location of one of Russia's nuclear submarine bases, which took some damage from the eruption. And tsunami warnings were issued across the Pacific region, including in Japan, where the Fukushima nuclear plant, which was devastated in the 2011 tsunami, had to be evacuated. So we did see some pretty dramatic events involving water and nuclear technology just a bit earlier than expected. Fortunately, the tsunami did relatively little damage, and there was just one fatality globally. Here was the outer planet configuration at that moment, and you can see that Mars was approaching its opposition to Saturn, although it was still about 6 degrees away. Now, was the July tsunami the fulfillment of the prophecy of Japanese manga artist Ryo Tatsuki, who predicted a devastating undersea volcano and tsunami event in July? Well, maybe, sort of, kind of, but not really, and thank goodness for that. What Tatsuki had predicted was a tsunami 3 times the size of the 2011 tsunami and enormous devastation across Japan. Thankfully, that didn't happen. As I said in my July forecast, there seems to be some kind of cosmic law that widely known prophecies don't come true. But I did say that I thought the astrology of the current times did support something like that playing out. This looks like the massive release of tension that I mentioned would be coming as Uranus moves out of Taurus and into Gemini. Now, soon after the tsunami, there was a very high-profile spat involving nuclear brinkmanship between the US and Russia. In response to threats made online by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, Donald Trump ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be moved closer to Russia, making an implicit nuclear threat. This led to all sorts of dramatic headlines about nuclear brinkmanship, including this one accusing Trump of using madman tactics to threaten Russia. In response to Trump's move, Russia pulled out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which bans the deployment of certain ground-based missiles. So nuclear war was all over the news in early August. But thankfully, the situation wasn't as serious as I feared it could be. Now, the August kite configuration included an opposition between Mars and Saturn, which meant it was a key moment in the synodic cycle of those two planets. And there are two other storylines that seem to be synchronized with this cycle. Firstly, at the conjunction of Mars and Saturn in April 2024, and at their square in August 2024, there were attacks that damaged Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, currently held by Russia. And at the opposition last month, the same thing happened yet again. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported that there were explosions and smoke seen at the plant on August the 2nd, prompting its Director General to issue a statement warning of the dangers of hitting this nuclear power plant. Here's the position of Mars on August the 2nd. It was about 5 degrees away from an exact opposition with Saturn, close enough to be considered in orb, in my opinion. And then on August the 24th, a Ukrainian drone shot down by Russia caused a fire at the plant. So almost like clockwork, every time Mars and Saturn have made hard aspects during their current cycle, we've seen dangerous incidents at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And the other theme we've seen coming up over and over again during this Mars-Saturn cycle is war between Israel and Iran. But we didn't see that at the opposition, as I said I was expecting. And I have to hold my hands up and say I got that call wrong. As to the reason why, all I can think is that we already saw that conflict in the 12-day war in June. So perhaps the lesson we can take here from a forecasting perspective is that if an expected event appears much earlier than it should in a cycle due to other triggers, don't expect it again. Now, I've pointed out that we can expect to see some kind of turning point in terms of nuclear technology around this time. On July the 30th, it was announced that a company called Helion Energy, a startup backed by OpenAI's Sam Altman, has started construction on a nuclear fusion power plant that will supply power to Microsoft data centers by 2028. This does seem rather incredible because, as far as I'm aware, nuclear fusion isn't yet a viable technology, at least not officially, and this would be the first such plant in world history. But it was reported in Reuters, so it does seem to be legit. And then on August the 5th, a little before a full moon in Aquarius lit up the sky, NASA made a remarkable announcement. Acting head of the agency, Sean Duffy, said the agency planned to build a nuclear reactor on the moon. He said that Russia and China were building their own such reactor, and so the US had to get there first. This is probably the most Pluto in Aquarius story you could imagine, and you have to ask, have we just seen the start of a new nuclear space race? Now, in the August forecast, I pointed out that the end of the month would see the first of 5 exact sextiles between Uranus and Neptune. Back in '93, at the time of the last Uranus-Neptune conjunctions, the US and Russia signed the START II nuclear arms reduction treaty. With that in mind, I said I thought that the sextile of August could be positive for relations between the US and Russia. It's kind of hard to see how it could happen right now, but I do wonder if the Uranus-Neptune sextiles will signify some kind of rapprochement between the US and Russia, and maybe new agreements on cooperation or arms reduction. And lo and behold, we saw a peace summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska. The meeting hasn't led to immediate results, such as an end to the Ukraine war, but it does seem at least possible that we're moving towards finally seeing peace in Ukraine. And there were widespread reports that Putin wants a new nuclear arms treaty with the United States. That theme is echoing through time. Last month also saw Donald Trump deploying the National Guard to the streets of Washington, D.C. The vastly different way that this action has been taken in liberal and conservative circles points to the big divide in the country, but that's nothing new. What's worrying is how that divide is now expressing itself in relation to the presence of security forces. Neptune's last ingress into Aries coincided with the American Civil War. With Neptune now back in Aries with Saturn, there seems to be a growing conflict over the question of what the US should be at this point in the 21st century, and the theme of borders seems to be crucial to the issue. That's a theme that Saturn-Neptune conjunctions tend to raise. Saturn signifies borders, Neptune dissolves them, and we're at a time where the question of what borders should mean is up for debate. It's not just the US. Around the world, we're seeing a growing conflict between people with a globalist vision and those with a more traditionally nationalistic one. For example, in the UK right now, activists are putting up English flags as part of what they've called Operation Raise the Colours. The question of sovereignty, an Aries theme, if ever there was one, is being contested. Now, before we go, a quick return to the good old UFO topic. One of the themes that remote viewer Josh Maitland saw coming up when he looked at the astrology of August was UFOs and nukes. And now Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who is determined to push the idea that interstellar objects could be alien space probes, is saying that 3I Atlas, the latest such interstellar object, may be generating its own light and could even be nuclear powered. Loeb's insistence on the spacecraft interpretation is perhaps a little suspicious, and you might even wonder if he's doing that to drum up an alien threat narrative that would justify all sorts of budgets for academics and the security services. But it does seem like there may be some strange things going on with 3I Atlas. First of all, it's extremely large. Some new estimates suggest it may be 46 kilometers wide, millions of times bigger than Oumuamua. The only gas it's emitting is CO2, which is absolutely not what you see with ordinary comets. And then there's the fact that the James Webb Space Telescope photographed the object on August the 6th, just as Mars entered Libra and the kite was forming. No pictures were released until August the 26th, when they put out this highly pixelated image. Normally such photos are released immediately, and it seems weirdly low res. So perhaps something truly remarkable did happen on August the 6th, and we aren't yet being told what it was. And YouTuber Jesse Michaels also dropped an incredible documentary on the so-called alien mummies of Peru, which frankly, I think everybody needs to watch. It's linked below. The TLDR of it is this: the alien mummies seem to be real, even if they may not be aliens. It seems that besides the tsunami, the amazing astrology of August expressed itself more in the informational realm than in physical events. And of course, that astrology featured a grand trine in the air signs. So I've chalked this one up to experience. And there was another piece of news in late July that may turn out to be the most important of all. A group of astronomers released a new research paper, which may just have proved the reality of UFOs. A team led by Beatrice Villarroel at the University of Stockholm analyzed hundreds of photographic plates of the sky taken by the Mount Palomar Observatory in the 1950s, before there were any man-made objects in Earth orbit. They identified countless numbers of what they called transients on the plates. Transients are points of light that are present on some plates and not on others, indicating that they're not stars and they're not planets. What they found is that these lights appeared far less regularly in the Earth's shadow, and what this implies is that they were reflective objects, not blemishes on the plates, for example. And what's more, they found that these objects were seen more often around the times of nuclear tests on Earth and during known UFO flaps. UFOs and nukes again, anyone? They're scientists, so they're being cautious about their conclusions, of course. But others believe they've essentially identified a network of artificial objects in orbit around the Earth from before the launch of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite known to have been launched by humans. The implications are, frankly, mind-boggling. In the bonus section of this video, we explore this story and others that point towards an emerging sci-fi world, and we consider some of the astrology that's signifying it. In other words, we get weird, alien mummies, weather weapons, the sphere network, it's all in there. If you want to watch that version of this video, then sign up as a member of World Astrology Report, either here on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com. Website members can also watch all my live streams where I go deeper into particular topics in astrology, history, and occultism. Oh, and one last thing. I just opened up a small number of consultation slots, so if you want me to look at your chart, head to worldastrologyreport.com and book now. And remember that paying members get 20% off with the code MEMBER20 at checkout. That's it for the retrospective part of this video. Let's get into the forecast for September 2025. On September the 1st, Saturn will retrograde its way back into Pisces, beginning its final almost 6-month stint in the sign of the Fishes for this cycle. Saturn will remain in Pisces until it returns to Aries on February the 14th of 2026. Saturn's movements are always worth paying close attention to, and whether you're talking about individual lives or the world at large, they often lend a period its general focus and tone. Now, right now, when it comes to Saturn, we're in a liminal period. The Saturn in Aries era has already begun, but the Saturn in Pisces period hasn't yet finished. Saturn is the container of the traditional cosmos, patrolling the boundary to the divine realm. I imagine it symbolically as a force exerting pressure on everything in the material cosmos, causing energy to condense into the heavy, differentiated forms of matter that we find here. Since we're all being compressed, Saturn is pushing us inwards and thus away from each other. Hence why Saturn is a signifier of solitude and can signify separation and division. Saturn's pressure destroys weak forms that aren't meant to last, but those that are crystallize and are rendered capable of enduring. And so Saturn both destroys and creates structures as well as limits, restrictions, boundaries, and rules. Now, since May 2025, it's been in Aries. That move coincided with a ratcheting up of pressure on the conflicts of the world and talk of civil war in the United States. Saturn is in fall in Aries, a traditional state of debilitation. Its natural process is one of slow crystallization, but that doesn't really work in the fiery, fast-moving sign of Mars. And so Saturn is said to produce less productive effects in this sign. It can produce a deep need to prove oneself and to express one's identity and sovereignty. With Saturn leaving Aries, look for some relief from your Saturn in Aries story. I've had Saturn in my 12th house over the last 3 months, and I can tell you it ain't been fun. So I, for one, am pretty happy about this shift, even if I do recognize that even these unpleasant transits serve a necessary purpose that you wouldn't want to miss out on. From September onwards, expect a return to themes that you were dealing with between March 2023 and May 2025, when Saturn was in Pisces. Saturn would have been putting pressure on the Pisces whole sign house of your chart, causing certain things to fall away, bringing the need for work, and perhaps building new structures. Perhaps you're a Sag rising, making Pisces your 4th whole sign house. Perhaps you'll need to do some more work on your home going forward, or some challenges with your parents will come back to your attention. Or perhaps you're a Cancer rising, making Pisces your 9th house, and you'll find yourself drawn once again towards disciplined study or spiritual practice, or forced to travel long distance. Now, from a mundane perspective, in Pisces, an oceanic sign that lacks boundaries, Saturn puts pressure on the flow of goods, trade, and people. It's led to restrictions around those things and new rules and boundaries. Consider the Houthi attacks on shipping close to Yemen, and growing opposition to immigration and tourism around the world, and the Trump tariffs. I think it also signified the explosion in popularity of image generation AI tools. These were tools that materialize Saturn, the products of dreams and imagination, Pisces. We'll probably see more big advancements in those areas in the next 6 months. In general, Saturn in Pisces can also bring disasters at sea and new rules and regulations related to the arts, faith, spirituality, and sexuality, among other things. Now let's move on, because Pluto is also doing something extremely interesting in September. On August the 29th or thereabouts, Pluto went out of bounds and will remain so until November the 23rd this year. To understand what this means, you need to understand the meaning of the astronomical term declination. This is the angular distance of a celestial body from the celestial equator. The ecliptic, which is the apparent path of the sun, is tilted at an angle of 23.4 degrees from the equator. This means that the maximum declination of the sun is 23.4 degrees north, which it reaches at the summer solstice. Its minimum declination is 23.4 degrees south, which it reaches at the winter solstice. At the 2 equinoxes, when day and night are of equal length, the sun's declination is 0 degrees. Now, when a planet's declination exceeds 23.4 degrees, it's said to have gone out of bounds. The idea is that the planet has moved out of the realm of the sun. It's moved beyond its boundaries and is no longer limited or bound by the normal rules. It's able to pursue its agenda without limit. Pluto's agenda is, to put it in a single word, power. It teaches us the meaning of power, how to find it, how to use it, how to resist it, and what it means to be without it. As the lord of the underworld, Pluto is also associated with processes of death and rebirth. In Greek myth, Persephone needed to journey to the underworld in order to later become empowered as its queen. Now, Pluto goes out of bounds twice during its 248-year cycle, once to the north and once to the south of the equatorial plane. The last time it went out of bounds north was between 1938 and 1953, which I suspect you'll agree was a rather dramatic period in history, one in which the theme of power was rather important. This entirely takes in the period of the Second World War, the invention and use of nuclear weapons, highly plutonian, and the start of the Cold War. And here we need to talk about the research of the astrologer Rosie Finn, who appeared on this channel in this episode. Rosie has done a ton of research on the Pluto cycle and its journeys out of bounds. She's found that when Pluto goes out of bounds north, we tend to see tyrants and empire builders ravaging the planet. Adolf Hitler, Genghis Khan, and Julius Caesar were all in action during Pluto out of bounds north periods. Last time Pluto reached peak northern declination in 1945, when the US unleashed the plutonic power of the atomic bomb on Japan. Pluto out of bounds south periods, which is what we're heading into this month, also see extreme plutonic lessons in the nature of power, but there's a difference. They tend to see revolts, rebellions, and the collapse of civilizations. Pluto will be going out of bounds south every year from now until 2035. According to Rosie, it'll reach its peak southern declination in 2030, which is very interesting. That's the year that the UN has targeted for its Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Another remarkable factor that Rosie has identified is the fact that Pluto won't be going out of bounds again for thousands of years. As astrologers, we have to consider that kind of astronomical phenomenon to be meaningful. But what could it mean? It's not as if the Pluto cycle itself is ending. Pluto will still reach peaks and troughs of declination, but it won't head into the out of bounds zone anymore. Here I can't help but think about the Yuga cycle, which I covered in these two recent videos. If we are indeed ascending out of the Kali Yuga, the dark age of materialism and ignorance, then perhaps, just perhaps, the unending cycle of empire building and revolt is about to change or even end. But not before one last period of revolutionary history. And that's what we're heading into now. Interestingly, Pluto out of bounds south corresponds, roughly speaking, to its transit through the sign of Aquarius. Pluto and Aquarius transits tend to see revolts against central authority and eventually the establishment of new power structures at the margins of empire. Last time we saw the American Revolution. The time before that was the height of the Protestant Reformation and the revolt against the Pope by England's Henry VIII. But if last time the revolt was against the British Empire and the time before that it was against the Catholic Church, then the question we should be asking is, what's the center that people will be revolting against this time? I think different people will have different answers to that depending on their political persuasion. It's a difficult and pointed question because everyone these days feels like their side is the one that's being victimized and oppressed. And everyone assumes that any so-called revolution is going to redound to their side's favor. Nobody wants to deal with an "are we the baddies" moment. What's undeniable is that right now, if you look around the world, you'll see a number of countries that seem to be on the verge of civil war, aka revolution. In my own country, the United Kingdom, people have started putting up the English flag in public areas to assert a kind of English rebellion against mass immigration and the rapidly changing character of the country. This is being denounced by the media as far right and racist and so forth. But regardless of what labels that you want to put on it, it does look to me like a kind of revolution in the making. As in many places, we seem to be seeing battle lines being drawn. On one side, we have a kind of internationalist perspective that sees borders as outworn things of the past. To be frank, this perspective is aligned with that of the corporate world, which wants to be able to move labor around the world and keep economies in states of continual growth. And rising against that perspective are nationalist movements, right-wing populists who are pushing back against mass immigration and are holding on to older expressions of identity and sovereignty. So it seems to me that we're essentially seeing a battle over borders and over the question of how much power nation states should still have at this point. Incidentally, it will be interesting to see how what's happening with the UFO phenomenon and the potential uncovering of the reality of other intelligences sharing this world with us will affect this dynamic. That's what it all looks like to me right now, but I am open to the possibility that my perspective might be limited here. All right, that's it for Pluto. Now let's turn to its partner in the air signs right now, Uranus. On September the 6th, Uranus will station retrograde for the first time this cycle in its new sign of Gemini. Uranus moved into Gemini on July the 7th, initiating a roughly 8-year transit through the mutable air sign of the Twins. At a personal level, Gemini represents one of the 12 whole sign houses of your chart. That part of your life may have been shaken up in some way since the Uranus ingress. Those shakeups can feel chaotic or disruptive. Ultimately, Uranus's transits are aimed at making you more yourself. They're there to shake up sclerotic structures that have gotten stuck, undo the ways that you've sold yourself out, and get you back in touch with what your higher self wants for you. When Uranus stations retrograde, we can expect an intensification of the Uranian energy of disruption and reconfiguration. So pay attention. Ask yourself, how is this helping me to reconfigure my life so that I can be more authentic, more me? Maybe you're a Virgo rising and Gemini is your 10th house and you just got a new boss who's changing your workplace. And now work feels completely different and it's much more to your liking. Or alternatively, it's pushing you out the door and forcing you to look for something new. That could be something that's more in line with who you really are. Or perhaps you're an Aquarius rising and Uranus is in the Gemini 5th house. Maybe your children are leaving the nest, freeing you up to take up new hobbies. Perhaps you just got access to a new creative studio. Expect the sense of new possibility to intensify as Uranus stations retrograde. Now, at a mundane level, Uranus's retrograde station will give us some important clues about what Uranus's 7-year transit through Gemini is going to be about. But since Uranus entered the sign in early July, we've already seen some strong hints. We have the sky god Uranus in an air sign, so we should in part be looking up to understand what's going to change. We're starting to hear more and more news about things like automated drone delivery, which I think will be totally normal by the end of the transit. We're also seeing the first vertical takeoff air taxis making their first flights. There's more and more noise about space tourism and UFOs and interstellar objects, of course. Gemini governs transport. I think we're going to see driverless cars finally becoming common on the streets, and it has to do with exchange, communication, and computation. So look out for big news about developments in AI, quantum computing, and new communications technology around the time of the station. I think Pluto and Uranus in air signs are also going to bring a revelatory tone to the times. We're seeing big news coming out of Egypt at the moment, revelations about our ancient history. These are revelations about what's underground, driven by technology in the sky, satellites. And we're seeing growing recognition of how widespread weather modification is. Cloud seeding is well recognized and happens in many parts of the world. And I think we're also going to see recognition of other techniques with other intentions. And something else we've seen that looks to me like the mark of Uranus in Gemini is the passing of the Genius Act in July, the US's first major cryptocurrency legislation. The act establishes regulations for stablecoins, cryptocurrencies whose value is pegged to that of the dollar. This seems to be a bid to retain the dollar's status as global reserve currency by ensuring that it remains the most easily available and usable currency in the digital era. Uranus is the planet that archetypally represents genius, pointing to the question of whether the people involved in pushing through this legislation are consulting astrologers. As I discussed in this video, every time Uranus has passed through Gemini, there's been a major reset for the US dollar. The last time Uranus transited Gemini, the Bretton Woods Conference established the dollar as global reserve currency. Now, I'm raising all these Uranus and Gemini shifts so we know the kind of things to keep our eyes peeled for as Uranus stations retrograde. The retrograde station will likely bring more shifts along these lines, and as is Uranus's SOP, some unexpected ones. The theme of twins could also be activated, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see more revelations about UFOs or 3-eye atlas. All right, let's keep moving because we've got a lot to talk about this month, because it also happens to be eclipse season. On September the 7th, we'll see a lunar eclipse in the 16th degree of Pisces. Lunar eclipses represent major endings, culminations, and revelations. They're like full moons, but with triple the power. A lunar eclipse in Pisces is likely to bring forth themes like the ocean, spirituality and religion, oil, mental health, sexuality, immigration, and the arts, among other things. But there's a polarity activated when we see a lunar eclipse between two opposing signs. And so Virgo is also implicated here. The Pisces-Virgo axis is the axis of existence. It invokes the sense of being spirit, Pisces in material incarnation, Virgo. A Virgo-Pisces lunar eclipse will invoke conflicting polarity between two areas of life, one where boundaries are fluid, Pisces, and another one that's much more ordered and realistic and concerned with seeing things how they are in the material world, Virgo. Lunar eclipses can be emotionally powerful moments, especially one in a water sign like this one. But that said, this eclipse has a nice mitigating factor attached to it. It's in a trine with the ruler of Pisces, Jupiter. That's certainly a positive thing. The ruler of the eclipse can see the moon and it can guide events towards positive outcomes, or it can at least take the edge off and offer some redeeming qualities to events. That said, Jupiter is in a square with fiery, warlike Mars. Jupiter-Mars combinations have a crusading quality to them. I'm getting the feeling that this eclipse is already well in evidence in the UK, where two sides with strong faith and convictions are lining up against each other. The lunar eclipse in Pisces in September is the second in a series of 3 Pisces lunar eclipses that we'll see during this nodal cycle. The first of them came on September the 18th of 2024, so you can look back to that period for a sense of the kind of themes that this eclipse will invoke. I think these Pisces eclipses are bad news for the UK and Ireland, which are experiencing a lot of contention right now around the theme of immigration. In 2024, the Southport riots that followed the murder of several school children by a man rumoured to be a migrant came a few weeks before that first Pisces eclipse. And very close to the precise moment of the eclipse, we saw the audacious Israeli pager attack on Lebanon's Hezbollah. It was a moment of culmination, revelation, and perhaps an ending for Hezbollah. We can also see the Piscean themes of illusion and deception here, combined with Virgo themes of technical and organizational skill. The lunar eclipse of September 2025 is taking place in the 16th degree of Pisces, very close to the conjunctional point of the current Mars-Saturn cycle. Mars and Saturn met in the 15th degree of Pisces on April the 10th, 2024, very close to where this eclipse is taking place. So I'm thinking this eclipse could bring to light things related to that cycle, including nuclear technology, freak weather events, and the Iran-Israel conflict. And it's a Pisces eclipse, so themes like water, faith, migration, deception, and illusion are all ripe to rise to the surface here. Let's see what happens. And then comes a solar eclipse, one I'm much more concerned about. On September the 21st, we'll see a solar eclipse in the last degree of Virgo. This is a very interesting eclipse, and frankly, one that looks a bit on the heavy side. I talked about this eclipse before in this video, in which I explained why I thought it could be signaling a financial crisis or transformation of some kind. And I looked at the historical correlations associated with the families of eclipses that this one belongs to. If you haven't already seen it, you might want to watch that video after this one. But I'm going to review some of that material here. Firstly, this eclipse is interesting because of its position in the zodiac. It's taking place in the final degree of Virgo. The ends of the mutable signs in the tropical zodiac carry with them the sense of crisis, death, and transformation. And the reason for that is that these points mark the very end of the seasons. When the sun is in this part of Virgo, we're just about to reach the autumn equinox when light and darkness partake equally in the share of the day. From this moment in the Northern Hemisphere, we enter the dark half of the year. So there's a sense of descent into the underworld. What happens there? Well, we're judged. Judgment comes when the sun moves into Libra, sign of the scales. So this eclipse is happening at a crisis point. It looks to me like it could be signaling both the end of an old system and the beginning of a new one. And it's going to be opposing Saturn very closely, which will be in the 29th degree of Pisces. And Saturn is conjunct Neptune, so the eclipse is triggering the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we've been talking about for quite some time now. That Saturn-Neptune conjunction seems to have been a signal of the Trump tariffs. The conjunction is going exact next year in the first degree of Aries on February the 20th. The first degrees of the 4 cardinal signs are the 4 world points and are said to signify events that have an effect on the entire planet. I think the Trump tariffs fit the bill. They're essentially barriers to trade, Saturnian restrictions to the free flow of goods, Neptune. We might also expect to see major events related to Russia around the time of this eclipse, because we know that Russian history resonates heavily to Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and this eclipse is triggering that conjunction directly. But bear in mind with solar eclipses that they make themselves felt up to 3 months before they actually appear in the sky. Legendary astrologer Bill Meridian told me this, and I've verified it with my own observations. We might have already seen the beginnings of the effects of this eclipse in the form of the talks between Trump and Putin in Alaska. And I think the Genius Act coming into force could be one of the manifestations of it too. That said, eclipses will generally be accompanied by events close to the time as well, often dramatic ones, which signal big changes. And after they're seen, they're in effect over a period of months and years. It's as if a portal has been opened and new forms are able to flow through it, so long as the eclipse is in effect. So look out for signs of a financial crisis brewing in September. In fact, we may already be seeing one. And it has to do with AI. People are increasingly suggesting that AI is in fact a bubble, that companies involved in it are drastically overvalued, and that a crash is imminent. Sam Altman himself recently said that some AI company valuations were quote-unquote insane. As a result, in mid-August, several AI stocks plunged, including Palantir, which plunged almost 10%. So it's looking at least possible that some kind of replay of the bursting of the dot-com bubble in 2000 could be on the way, this time centered around AI. That would fit with the symbolism of this eclipse. Virgo has to do with technicalities and critique. Oh, and interestingly enough, the eclipse is hitting the chart of the Federal Reserve quite directly. The Fed has the Sun and Pluto in opposition in its chart in the very early degrees of Capricorn and Cancer. The eclipse with Saturn and Neptune is completing a grand cross here. Perhaps this is signaling the impact of the Genius Act on the Federal Reserve. Let's see. And before we go, I have one last thing for you. Libra season. On September the 22nd, we reach the autumn equinox, and so Libra season begins. Libra represents judgment and comes after the autumn equinox, when we enter the half of the year in which darkness predominates over light. In other words, Libra comes after the descent into the underworld. It's associated with Ma'at, the Egyptian goddess of justice, who would weigh the hearts of the dead against a feather and so judge their worthiness. Libra is ruled by the planet Venus, and so it's concerned with human relations and our place in society. But as an air sign, it's related to the social intercourse that binds us together. Saturn is also the exaltation ruler of Libra, and so has a lot to say about the Libra domain. It's the realm of deals, partnerships, and contracts, and the ways in which we're bound to others through commitments and duty. And so Libra is exquisitely aware of social structures and what holds them together. We live in a society, and Libra knows this better than most. It's a sign of diplomacy, manners, and etiquette. All the air signs are ruled by triplicity, by Saturn and Mercury. And so with Libra, think of the influences of Venus, human relations, Saturn, structure, and Mercury, communication, blended into one sign, and you're well on your way. The stereotype about Libras is that they can't make decisions, they're constantly weighing this option versus that option, and seeing both sides of the argument to the point where they can't choose one over the other. There's probably some element of truth in this, but it doesn't make them bad decision makers necessarily, just careful ones. The world clearly needs people who can see both sides of the story. And on the theme of decision-making, well, Russian President Vladimir Putin has a 4-planet stellium in Libra, including his Sun, Mercury, and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction of 1952. As an aside, as with Russia itself, major events in Putin's career closely track the major aspects of the Saturn-Neptune cycle. But say what you like about Putin, he didn't get where he is today without being able to make decisions. And he puts to rest the reputation of Libras for being somehow superficial or lightweight. Another person with a Libra stellium was British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who had Sun, Mercury, and Mars in Libra, and isn't exactly known as a weak decision maker either. "This lady is not for turning," she famously said. Interestingly, she's also famous for saying something you wouldn't expect a Libra to say. There's no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families. Could that be her exiled Mars in Libra speaking there? Answers on a postcard. And with that, I'll leave you and wish you a wonderful Libra season. That's almost it for this video. In the bonus section coming up next for members of World Astrology Report, we dive into the emerging elements of our bizarre sci-fi reality, including weather weapons, alien mummies, and the network of artificial objects that some researchers claim surrounds our Earth and isn't human. Oh, and there's some astrology relating it all together. If you enjoyed this video and what I said about the September eclipse, then I suggest you watch this video, which looks at the patterns of history that it speaks to. Thanks for watching, and see you again very soon.